Big news coming out of the latest set of Impact Wrestling television tapings following No Surrender. We have an update when it comes to the explanation of Eddie Edwards as to why he turned on Team Impact at No Surrender. We have an update also when it comes to Moose's next Impact World Championship challenger, and also what's next for Jay White and the Good Brothers. Spoiler warning ahead. All this and more in today's Impact Wrestling News. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is plenty of news stories to get into today. So we're going to talk about some of the Impact Wrestling news coming out of the latest set of television tapings. Now, as always, whenever we talk about this, I'm not usually one to discuss spoilers. For instance, when AEW have a Rampage show, or when they had SmackDown pre-tape because they were going to Saudi Arabia the other week. Usually I don't talk about spoilers, but for Impact Wrestling it's slightly different because of the way they tape their content. You have to talk about the news as it happens, and then again in maybe a couple of weeks' time once it's aired on television. And it's interesting because I think the reaction to seeing it written down or typed out on the internet, on social media after the television tapings in the form of spoilers, sometimes the reaction to that is completely different to when you see it on television and you actually see it air and you see it presented in the format that Impact Wrestling wants to present it in. Sometimes the reaction can be a lot different, and sometimes you're reacting to the news of something and then you're reacting to actually watching it happen as well. So we're going to cover both, but as always, there is a spoiler warning. You can see it on the screen right now. So if you don't wish to be spoiled for the upcoming episodes of Impact Wrestling on Access TV, you're more than welcome to leave the video now. So I'll give you a bit of a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's get into Eddie Edwards. Now, Eddie Edwards, of course, was arguably one of the biggest talking points coming out of No Surrender this past weekend, and that's when Eddie Edwards turned his back on Team Impact and sided with Honor No More, easy for me to say, the Ring of Honor Former Stars faction. And people were wondering, what's the explanation going to be in terms of storyline? What's the storyline explanation going to be as to why Eddie Edwards turned his back on Impact Wrestling, the heart and soul of Impact Wrestling? How dare he turn his back? The former two-time Impact World Champion, he's the guy that's committed himself to being with Impact Wrestling for the remainder of his pro wrestling career. Why would he turn his back? Why would Impact Wrestling present a storyline where Eddie Edwards turns his back on Impact Wrestling and sides with Honor No More? And in fairness, once you hear the explanation that they're given in terms of storyline, it's not a bad one. Now, I must say there are parts of this which I sort of go, I'm not necessarily sure I would go with that, but it is interesting. So there was a match at the television tapings in Louisiana where Honor No More's Matt Taven, Mike Bennett, and Kenny King defeated Chris Sabin, Rich Swann, and Willie Mack when Mike Bennett pinned Mack. Now, Maria Kanellis, Vincent, and PCO were at ringside, as were Heath and Rhino for that match. Now, after the match, Maria introduced Eddie Edwards, which led to Scott D'Amore coming out and making sure that Team Impact leave to prevent a fight. Of course, Honor No More now have contracts with Impact Wrestling, so they're allowed to be there, and they fall under the jurisdiction of Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President Scott D'Amore. So that's why he got them to leave, to prevent a ruckus, if you will. Now, Eddie said that he came up with the Ring of Honor guys and felt betrayed when Ring of Honor closed, but that's not the only reason why he joined the faction. They identified dishonor and they're going to expose it. Impact Wrestling opened the doors, and he had faith in what Impact Wrestling was doing, even when AEW's Kenny Omega challenged for the title, but Rich Swann failed and Omega disrespected the title by not carrying it to the Impact Wrestling ring for a match, and he was helped by one of Impact Wrestling's own, Don Callis. Eddie said it was up to the locker room to do something because management did nothing. Eddie waited to call his shot while Sami Callihan and Moose failed. He won a 6-man match against Omega and he thought he'd get the shot, which is a really good point. He did, and I remember at the time saying that's really weird that he's not going to challenge for the title. He did have appendicitis after that, but we'll go back to it. So, as I mentioned, Eddie waited to call his shot while Sami Callihan and Moose failed. He won that 6-man match against Omega and thought he'd get his shot, but instead, Impact Wrestling officials gave it to Josh Alexander. Impact Wrestling showed they had no faith in Eddie Edwards, and they ripped the heart out of Impact. Now, this then led to Edwards' wife, Alicia Edwards, coming out and saying she doesn't understand why Eddie turned his back on their family. He then said Honor No More is his family now. She asked him if she is still his family, and Eddie said that's up to her. Eddie left with Honor No More, leaving Alicia alone in the ring. So There's a lot to break down when it comes to that one. First of all, I will say that again, when the turn happened at the weekend, I was a bit like, that's a big call to make, considering that Eddie Edwards is the ultimate babyface, the ultimate fan favorite when it comes to Impact Wrestling. The loyalty he's shown to that company, and the unwavering loyalty, frankly, of saying, look, I'm not going anywhere else. Even if I got offered a contract with WWE or AEW, I wouldn't take it. I'm happy being there. I thought that's a big call. It's certainly an unexpected swerve, and I'm interested to see where they go with it. In terms of the rationale and the justification that they've used in this storyline, I think it's great. I think that is very valid. I think it's logical. I love the idea of him saying, look, I was the heart and soul of Impact Wrestling, but what is this group? This group's called Honor No More. They identified dishonor and they're going to expose it. And actually, when I look around here, Impact Wrestling, they opened that forbidden door. They allowed outsiders to come in from AEW and other companies, but specifically AEW, Kenny Omega. And what happened when it came to defending the rights of Impact Wrestling, when it came to defending Impact Wrestling and defending the Impact World Championship against an outside invading force, Kenny Omega. And by the way, his introduction into Impact Wrestling was facilitated by an Impact Wrestling executive at the time. When it came to people defending the company, they all failed. Whether it was Rich Swann, who ultimately lost the Impact World Championship to Kenny Omega, and then Kenny Omega wouldn't always carry the title to the ring. He'd give it to Don Callis, or he'd give it to someone else. He'd give it to Carl Anderson. He'd give it to Doc Gallows. He wouldn't sometimes carry it to the ring, and you give it to Michael Nakazawa, and people were frustrated with that as well at the time. Do you remember that? So he's looking at that and he's going, okay, but still, whilst management's failed, because Don Callis at the time was still technically an executive vice president, we're talking in storyline here, of course, he's frustrated, but he's looking at these other people on the Impact Wrestling roster going, well, at least they'll defend Impact Wrestling, right? At least they'll go after Kenny Omega and they'll win the title back. Whether it is Rich Swann, whether it is Sami Callihan, whether it is Moose, and they all failed. And yet the only person during that period of time that was able to actually score a victory over Kenny Omega, now he didn't actually pin Kenny Omega, it must be said, but the only one to actually win a match involving Kenny Omega was Eddie Edwards. It was that 6-man tag team match at Under Siege. It was Eddie Edwards and Finjuice going up against Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers. And I remember at the time doing the watch along and the post show and saying, that's really odd. I'm surprised that they would have Kenny Omega lose that match. Now, again, I think it was Carl Anderson ate the pinfall, and that was during the period of time. Remember where the Good Brothers were just losing every single match that they were booked in at the time? And it was very odd, very, very strange. And I didn't really understand it must be said. Nevertheless, I remember at the time thinking that's strange, and it didn't lead to anything. And I remember saying at the time, because that was Under Siege, that would have been around sort of May-ish time, I think it was, or maybe a bit later than that, maybe June. Nevertheless, I remember at the time thinking, okay, they're probably going to go with Eddie Edwards versus Kenny Omega. Now, I wasn't totally sold on that match for Slammiversary, but I thought, okay, of course it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Instead, they went with Kenny Omega versus Sami Callihan, and I wasn't totally sold on that, but in fairness to them, they delivered one hell of a main event. Really enjoyed that Slammiversary main event and the angle that came after it. But Eddie Edwards won a match against the Impact World Champion and nothing happened. Just nothing happened to it. Yeah, he had appendicitis and all that kind of stuff, but nothing happened of it, and that's odd. And I always enjoy it in any pro wrestling company where they go back and poke holes in logical issues. Now, I don't know if this was always the plan. I tend to think it's probably not. I tend to think it's Impact Wrestling looking at some situations where maybe the logic wasn't there and it didn't make a ton of sense, and they went, you know what, we can do something with that. We can change that. This Honor No More angle is a big angle. We can involve it with Ring of Honor also when ROH does open back up in April. We can do something with this. We can really do something with this. So I like the logic with that, with that explanation by Eddie Edwards. I do like the logic. The one thing that I did kind of roll my eyes at slightly was when Alicia Edwards came out and kind of did the whole, I don't know why you've turned your back on Impact Wrestling, and are you turning your back on me? And now Eddie Edwards is going, these are my family. I'm not sure if you're my family anymore. It's a question of taste. It's a question of how far you like to go when it comes to pro wrestling. I just, it's maybe a bit more of a too much of a jump, you know. This is a guy that has been presented as not only a good guy and a babyface for so long, but an undying family man who's got a wife, who's got children, and what, he's going to turn his back on his wife and his kid for some Ring of Honor guys because he was upset that some people in the company didn't defend Impact Wrestling good enough against AEW. That's maybe a stretch too far on that one in terms of logic. My only hope is, and again, they only taped, was it 2 shows, so we'll wait and see where the storyline does play out. But my hope would be that it's another swerve, and eventually Alicia Edwards, they play up maybe for a couple of weeks that Alicia Edwards and Eddie Edwards aren't talking and they don't know what's going on. And Eddie Edwards has not only turned his back on Impact, but he's also turned his back on his family, his wife, his child. And Alicia Edwards is so frustrated with all of this. And then eventually Alicia Edwards actually reveals that she's been in cahoots with Eddie Edwards the whole time, and I don't know, helps him capture maybe the Impact World Championship again or something of that nature. I could maybe see something like that happening in the future. So I'm willing to give that one the benefit of the doubt and let it play out. But I was a bit like, oof, I don't know how I feel about that. But apart from that, again, in terms of the explanation as to why he did what he did, I'm for it. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I'm interested to see the next evolution and the next steps of this Honor No More storyline. Now, we have an update when it comes to the new Bullet Club, because we're looking at a situation where certainly the club that's appearing on Impact Wrestling now is filled, 3 out of 4 are Impact Wrestling contracted talents. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. Of course, that came after Jay White turned on the GOD, the Guerrillas of Destiny, at No Surrender, kicking them out and seemingly bringing the Good Brothers back in. Now, of course, very significant considering the Good Brothers are former members of the Bullet Club. Kyle Anderson, former leader of the Bullet Club, founding member. I do think there might be a power struggle at some point in the future, I must be said. Nevertheless, we can see right there, that was the first, it was actually shot by a fan, this was the first entrance of the new Bullet Club in Impact Wrestling. Now, they did have a match on one of the episodes of Impact on Access TV, in which the Good Brothers, Jay White and Chris Bay, the, I guess, new Impact chapter of the Bullet Club, defeated the Guerrillas of Destiny and Violent by Design with Eric Young. Now, the GOD hit the ring and hit Bay with their finisher while Jay White escaped, and Tangaloa took the mic and said he's coming for White. So I spoke about this several times before, that I really did feel like this Bullet Club New Japan crossover was going to become way more extensive now that New Japan was back on Access TV. I felt that obviously they're not the same company by any stretch of the imagination, but we're going to see way more of a crossover, and I think they've expanded this working relationship way more than we previously had thought. Jay White at the moment is one of the busiest men in pro wrestling, right? He's appearing regularly on Impact Wrestling. He's appearing somewhat regularly for AEW. I don't know how long that's going to last, it must be said, but he's appearing on AEW, and he's appearing for New Japan and New Japan Strong too. So I'm curious to see where this does go. Again, it feels like at this point there's an Impact Wrestling chapter of the Bullet Club that's opened. The interesting thing of it, of course, is that there has been some discussion, certainly that I've seen on social media, and some people saying that maybe the Bullet Club is slightly tired at this point in terms of a gimmick. Look, the fact that this faction's been going around for a decade and they're still getting somewhat juice out of it is pretty impressive, to be honest. I'm interested to see how it plays out when it pertains to Impact Wrestling. I'm interested to see if we can see this Impact Wrestling chapter of the Bullet Club crossover more to New Japan, which we will see. So I'm sure we'll see this storyline crossover between New Japan and Impact. And the way they can do that, of course, is it's airing all on the same network. They could potentially, once we get these newer episodes of New Japan airing on Access TV, we could see an angle that really plays out on both shows. And I think that's interesting too. Again, when it comes to Tama Tonga, he's technically a free agent, so I don't actually know his status with New Japan right now, hence why maybe they're doing it in Impact Wrestling as opposed to New Japan. I'm not sure on that. That's more speculation on my part, but I'd love the idea of seeing this iteration of the Bullet Club cross over not only to New Japan, but also to AEW. The fact that we're seeing Jay White in AEW right now, and he's involved in the whole elite situation with the Young Bucks, Adam Cole, and whenever Kenny Omega comes back, I find it fascinating, the idea of possibly him bringing with him the Bullet Club to AEW, whether it's and with the Good Brothers and Chris Bay, because of course the Good Brothers were part of the Elite, the Super Elite, whatever they were called last year, until the Impact Wrestling and AEW working relationship didn't end, but that storyline ended, and then the Good Brothers went back to Impact Wrestling. So I'm curious as to where it's going to go, and I think we could see lots of different companies involved in this one, so that's really interesting too. Finally, we have an update on the next challenger for Moose's Impact World Championship. It's a bit of a surprising one because it's Heath. Impact Wrestling World Champion Moose did a segment where he came to the ring and said only one man in pro wrestling needs to be acknowledged, and that's him. It's a reference to Roman Reigns. You know, Moose loves the Roman Reigns reference. He's referenced him several times at this point. He's angling for that match. I don't know if that'll ever happen, Moose. Certainly not when you're Impact World Champion. Maybe, who knows what can happen. He took a shot at digital media champion Matt Cardona, possibly setting up a match in the future, but I don't really know how that would necessarily work, considering Matt Cardona's just turned heel, unless Moose is going to turn into a babyface, which I guess is possible. Nevertheless, he was interrupted by Heath instead of Matt Cardona. Now, Heath blamed COVID-19 protocols for his absence at No Surrender and demanded a title shot. Moose said he didn't give a damn about Heath's ugly-ass kids. I guess a Brock Lesnar reference. Remember that on Raw? And Heath laid him out. Heath raised the title over Moose and draped it over him. So Heath is going to be challenging for the Impact World Championship seemingly next. Now, I don't think there's any chance of Heath becoming the Impact World Champion, it must be said. I think this is just another feud to continue to build up Moose. He's not going to drop it so quickly after winning it and just coming off that W. Morrissey feud. I just don't see that necessarily happening. But it's an interesting feud for Moose. And frankly, I said this, the video is probably on the channel somewhere, when Heath was first released by WWE in April, and there were the rumors about him possibly coming in. Heath was a guy that I said, you know, I think he can be an Impact World Champion. And some people at the time maybe disagreed with me and said, "Oh, how do you see that? What are you looking at when it comes to that one?" And the reason I said I thought he could be an Impact World Champion is, I sort of looked past all of the stuff he did when it was the comedy stuff with WWE, with Rhino, or with 3MB, or just whatever it may be. I saw the promo he did opposite Drew McIntyre on Monday Night Raw from the WWE Performance Center in 2020. This was after he was released. He was brought back as for one night only, and there was rumors that they then offered him a contract to return, and he said no. And then a couple of months later, about a month later, he made his Impact debut at Slammiversary. I saw that promo, the fired up, nature of it, him getting emotional, tears, coming down his face. And I went, that guy can cut a promo. That's emotion. That's a promo that a world champion can do. Maybe not in WWE, but Impact Wrestling, that's a world champion promo. So he's had a difficult time since really coming to Impact, because obviously he did the angle about the free agent thing, which I wasn't massively keen on because I thought it was rehashing the WWE stuff. But since he's come back, and then he got injured, of course, and all that kind of stuff. But since he's come back, obviously looks to be in great shape. But now, this is the kind of stuff I hope that he would be doing. Serious Heath, going after a title because it benefits his children in the right way, and all that kind of stuff. And having a great match, having a spotlight match. So I'm interested. I'm really excited to see it. I'm interested to see new people jump into the main event. I don't really know what Moose's future looks like as champion, to be honest with you. I didn't think he was going to drop the title to W. Morrissey at all. So I expected him to retain, which he did. But sometimes with champions, you can usually predict when they're going to drop the title and who they're going to drop the title to. It's a fascinating time in Impact right now because I don't have the answer. Previously, I would have said it's Josh Alexander. That's what they set up. When Moose cashed in his Call Your Shot Gauntlet trophy at Bound for Glory in October, with the idea that eventually Josh Alexander would win it back. The problem is Josh Alexander isn't under contract to Impact Wrestling anymore. So I look at that roster and I say, well, maybe they're going to have to go in a different direction. So I don't know when or to who Moose would drop the championship to. And whenever you're in that kind of situation, my instincts are, well, let him keep the bout. Let him just keep beating people, and eventually the right person will come along. So the right person will get over. So I think that's probably going to be the case in the future. So some big interesting stories coming out of the tapings over the weekend. We haven't covered everything today. We will cover them probably over the course of the next couple of days, along with any other Impact Wrestling news stories. So be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner, and I'll speak for you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.